Let her shoot? That's rich. Colonel Robert McCain bellowed with laughter, nearly spilling his whiskey as he stared down at the 2-year-old black girl standing defiantly before him. Her name was Alyssa Carter, and she clutched an old envelope to her chest like it was armor. Around her neck, her late father's Medal of Honor swayed gently, a silent testament to a man who had died serving the very country now mocking his daughter. "I'd like to use the firing range, sir," Alyssa said with controlled calm, her voice steady, despite the snickers echoing around the room. "Today marks 3 years since my father, Staff Sergeant Michael Carter, passed. I want to honor him the way he taught me, by shooting." The officers exploded in laughter. "What next?" One scoffed. "She'll want to command a tank?" But what Colonel McCain and his cronies didn't know was this. Alyssa had been training in secret every weekend since the day her father died. Over 4,800 hours of practice. Each shot a whispered promise at his grave. Each sunrise on the base a quiet ritual of pain turned into power. That day, she didn't just request permission. She brought a storm built on grief, discipline, and a daughter's unbreakable vow. And when they mocked her, they unknowingly lit the fuse for the most humiliating defeat of their careers. At precisely 5:30 every Saturday morning, long before the American flag rose over Fort Ridgewell, a pair of small sneakers padded quietly across the gravel path toward the shooting range. No lights, no sounds, just the echo of memory and purpose. That figure, barely 4 feet tall, belonged to Alyssa Carter, a 12-year-old girl with a face too young for war, but eyes that carried the weight of it. 3 years earlier, Alyssa had stood by her father's flag-draped casket, unable to cry, unable to breathe. Her father, Staff Sergeant Michael Carter, had been her hero, her teacher, and, unknown to many, the base's best marksman. While others saw him as just another soldier, lost in combat, Alyssa saw the man who once taught her how to breathe between heartbeats, to steady her aim, who turned tin cans into targets, and Saturdays into sacred rituals of focus and calm. The grief didn't destroy her. It crystallized her. From the moment of his burial, she made a silent promise, one only the wind and the folded flag heard. "I will make them remember him, through me." And so the training began. At first, Alyssa used her father's old air pistol behind their modest military housing, shooting at paper plates pinned to trees. Her mother, still grieving, didn't question where her daughter disappeared every weekend morning, perhaps knowing somewhere deep inside that it was a part of healing. But Alyssa didn't train like a child playing pretend. She trained like a soldier. In mourning, she studied military marksmanship manuals, watched recordings of competitive tan shooters, and even created flashcards to quiz herself on wind adjustment, target distance, and sight alignment. By her second year, she had outgrown backyard targets. That's when Sergeant Luis Moreno, a retired combat veteran and longtime friend of her father, quietly stepped in. He'd been watching her from afar, seeing her carry her father's legacy like a torch. Moved by her discipline, he took a risk and began unlocking the base's firing range for her at dawn on Saturdays, long before official hours. No questions asked, no permission forms, just quiet, understanding between those who knew what honoring the dead looked like. He said nothing the first few sessions, just watched. But when she fired her 5th shot in a row into the bullseye of a moving target at 50 meters, eyes calm, shoulders steady, breathing textbook perfect, he whispered under his breath, "She's better than Michael ever was." Over the next 2 years, the range became Alyssa's sanctuary. She shot in rain, in fog, in blistering summer heat. Each round she loaded was not for play, but for purpose. Egg shot, fired was one more brick laid on the invisible monument she was building to her father's memory. By the time she turned 12, Alyssa had logged over 4,800 hours of live training. Not just physical, but mental. She learned how to block out distractions, control adrenaline spikes, and slip into what she called the stillness, the space between noise and thought, where a perfect shot is born. No one knew, not her teachers, not her mother, not the commanders who laughed when she made her formal request to shoot on the 3rd anniversary of her father's death. They saw a girl. They didn't see the soldier she had forged herself into. That was their first mistake. Her second promise, whispered one cold morning in front of her father's gravestone, was even bolder. When the time comes, I will not ask to be respected. I will show them why they must. And that day had finally come. The sun hung low over Fort Ridgewell as Colonel Robert McCain swaggered toward the shooting range, trailed by a pack of officers eager for spectacle. Their laughter cut through the morning stillness, bouncing off metal walls and fading into nervous chuckles from soldiers gathering nearby. This wasn't a training session. This was meant to be a public lesson in humiliation, a little girl being put in her place. But Alyssa Carter walked a few paces behind them, silent and calm, her father's medal of topping honor hanging over her heart. Every insult they had thrown at her in the officers' club just an hour before still rang in her ears. Yet none of them could see what she carried inside. 3 years of quiet discipline, 4,800 hours of training, and a fire no insult could extinguish. Colonel McCain gestured dramatically to the table of weapons. Pick your tool of embarrassment, little lady, he smirked. I'd recommend something light. Don't want you to hurt yourself before your first miss. The officers chuckled in unison. Alyssa stepped forward with the confidence of a seasoned soldier. Her fingers ran over the weapons with deliberate care until they stopped at a Glock 19, her father's pistol model. She lifted it gently, like greeting an old friend, and began inspecting it. With practiced ease, she checked the magazine, cleared the chamber, tested the slide. Sergeant Luis Moreno, the base's shooting instructor and her silent supporter, watched closely. His eyes narrowed. Every move was precise, efficient, familiar. Ready when you are, Alyssa said, stepping into position with her shoulders squared and stance grounded. The laughter dulled slightly. There was something unsettling in her tone, not defiant, not fearful, but steady, almost military. McCain crossed his arms. All right then, 10 shots, 50 meters. You hit at least 3, I'll approve your request. But if you fail, and you will, I expect your promise that you'll never waste our time again. Alyssa didn't blink. I accept. As she raised the Glock, the murmurs grew. Someone whispered, she's going to cry after the first shot. Another joked, she'll drop it from the recoil. But no one laughed when the first round rang out. Bang! A sharp crack split the silence. A few soldiers straightened instinctively. Bang! Another shot. The cadence was clean, calculated. Bang! 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 5 shots in. No hesitation. No delay. Just mechanical, confident precision. Sergeant Moreno brought up his binoculars, expecting to see a few scattered hits, maybe 2 on target. What he saw instead made his breath hitch. Dead center. All 5. Impossible, he muttered, adjusting the lens. Colonel McCain forced a chuckle. Fast doesn't mean accurate, he said too loudly, trying to regain control of the mood. But the growing silence around him spoke volumes. Bang. 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 Now 8. The officers who had once snickered were exchanging nervous glances. Even the passing soldiers stopped to watch. Bang. 9. Alyssa paused, just long enough to feel the wind shift ever so slightly. Bang. 10. She lowered the Glock with smooth, practiced hands, clicked the safety on, and turned to McCain. All 10 shots complete, sir, she said evenly. McCain waved dismissively. Yeah. We'll see what the target says. But Moreno was already walking brisk, determined. He reached the target, lifted his binoculars and froze. Then slowly, almost reverently, turned back to the crowd. "All 10, he said. "Dead center. A perfect cluster. One hole." The silence that followed was staggering. McCain grabbed the binoculars and looked for himself. His face drained of color as the truth hit him. What he had planned as humiliation had just made history. It wasn't just that a child had outshot them. It was how she did it. Calm, precise, dignified. The same little girl they mocked had just outperformed the entire officer corps. And as whispers rippled through the ranks and cell phones discreetly captured images of the target, it became clear. Alyssa Carter hadn't just earned permission to shoot. She had earned their respect. 200 meters, Sergeant Luis Moreno announced. Adjusting the target with careful precision, a hush had fallen over Fort Ridgewell's shooting range, not out of protocol, but awe. Moments earlier, 2-year-old Alyssa Carter had done the unthinkable. 10 shots. At 50 meters, all landing so tightly together that they formed a single perfect whole. What began as a humiliating dare from Colonel Robert McCain had become something entirely different. A historic moment unfolding before the eyes of soldiers and officers alike. Colonel McCain, who had once been full of cruel smirks and dismissive laughter, now stood unusually quiet. His face bore the forced composure of a man trying to process that the child he mocked might possess a gift that defied explanation and his authority. But Alyssa wasn't done. When Sergeant Moreno suggested extending the distance to 200 meters, she didn't flinch. She simply nodded, checked her Glock 19, and walked back to the new firing line. Her movements remained smooth, almost meditative. She exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the distant target. The murmurs began again. She can't possibly maintain accuracy at that range. No way. Not with a pistol. That's sniper territory. Alyssa heard none of it. Her father had taught her this level of calm. Breathe, like the wind. Isn't there, he used to say. Stillness between heartbeats. That's where the shot lives. Bang. The first shot cracked through the silence like a whip. Officers raised binoculars. Moreno's eyes widened. Hit, he confirmed. Dead center. Bang. 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 3 more shots, all on target. It wasn't luck. It was rhythm. Precision. It was muscle. Memory born from thousands of hours of training in silence, away from anyone's approval. By the 5th shot, a group of hardened veterans had arrived, drawn by rumors spreading like wildfire across the base. These weren't curious bystanders. They were combat-tested warriors. And yet, their expressions held something rare, reverence. Colonel McCain's hands were clenched behind his back. His earlier certainty had been shattered by undeniable proof, yet his pride refused to concede fully. She's just a kid, he muttered. Sir, Moreno said quietly, not breaking his gaze from the scope. That kid just beat every long-range pistol record I've ever seen. Bang. Bang. 7, 8. No hesitation. The Glock's slide moved like an extension of her hand. Then a strong gust of wind swept across the field. Several onlookers ducked instinctively. Alyssa waited, eyes narrowed. She made a subtle shift, barely noticeable, adjusting her angle against the crosswind. Bang. 9th shot. Perfect compensation. Direct hit. The final round. Everything seemed to pause. No one moved. Even the wind settled, as if paying respect. Bang. The 10th and final shot pierced the air with absolute authority. When it struck the target, a low gasp rippled through the crowd. Moreno lifted the scope once more, then slowly lowered. And it. She hit every one, he said, voice low. Not just hit. Grouped. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Then one by one, the officers began to applaud. Quietly at first, then building. Not out of obligation, but out of sheer disbelief. Alyssa turned and faced them, expression unreadable, shoulders squared with quiet dignity. This wasn't luck. This wasn't child's play. This was mastery. Alyssa Carter, at 12 years old, had done what most trained snipers couldn't replicate under pressure. She had turned grief into purpose, silence into discipline, and mockery into proof. And Fort Ridgewell would never be the same again. Within hours of Alyssa Carter's jaw-dropping performance at the Fort Ridgewell shooting range, the story had already outgrown the boundaries of the military base. It started with a single photo snapped discreetly by a young private who had been on his way to the motor pool. The image captured the moment Colonel Robert McCain, usually a symbol of authority, stood frozen in disbelief, binoculars slipping from his fingers while a 12-year-old black girl calmly lowered her pistol, her father's Medal of Honor gleaming in the morning sun. By lunchtime, that photo had made it onto the base's private message boards. By dinner time, it had spread to military forums across the country. And by the next morning, national news outlets had picked up the headline, "Little Girl Destroys Colonel's Ego with Perfect Shots at 12 Years Old." The video footage came next. Unofficial, grainy, but undeniable. 10 shots, 1 perfect hole. Then the 200-meter round. Then the 300. Then the impossible 500 meters with a standard issue pistol and iron sights, hitting a coin-sized target with machine-like precision. By the end of the week, the world knew her name, Alyssa Carter. She became an overnight sensation, not because she was lucky, but because she represented something people had longed to believe again, that discipline, resilience, and quiet dignity could still rise above prejudice, mockery, and power abuse. Television shows requested interviews. News anchors debated how such a young girl could have such elite-level skills. Some called her a prodigy. Others called her a miracle. But to those who knew her story, she wasn't either. She was simply a daughter honoring a promise. And the internet? It did what it does best. It amplified truth. The clip of Alyssa adjusting for wind at 500 meters and hitting dead center became a viral moment. Hashtags like #CarterLegacy and #Don't Underestimate Her flooded social media. Comment sections overflowed with messages from children, parents, veterans, and strangers. She just proved every doubter wrong. My daughter watched her video and said, "Maybe I can join the Navy too." She didn't just shoot targets. She shot through walls people put around her. For many, Alyssa's moment wasn't just inspiring. It was a revolution. Especially for young, black girls who had long been told where their place was. Alyssa had not only stepped into a space no one expected her to enter. She had owned it with a grace no amount of rank could manufacture. Inside the military, things changed fast. Colonel McCain faced an internal review. Once the symbol of dominance on base, he was now the subject of scrutiny. His jokes, his arrogance, his dismissal of a grieving child, they were no longer considered mere old-school leadership. They were evidence. Within weeks, he was reassigned to a remote administrative post in Alaska. His planned retirement ceremony, once promised with full honors, was quietly canceled. Major Thompson and Captain Walker, who had laughed the loudest, received formal reprimands and were required to undergo diversity and leadership retraining. Their careers, while not ended, would never again carry the same trajectory. And Alyssa? She soared. The Pentagon launched a new initiative, the Exceptional Youth Program, a blend of academic education and military mentorship for children of service members who demonstrated extraordinary skills. Alyssa became the face of it, earning the title Junior Precision Marksmanship Instructor, the youngest in U.S. military history. Recruitment centers began receiving letters from children who had never considered military service before now, inspired by Alyssa. Black veterans and female officers began sharing their own stories under the hashtag #SheRemindsMeOfMe. But more than the fame, what truly mattered to Alyssa was impact. Every Saturday, she still visited her father's grave. But now, she came not with tears, with stories. "I told them, Dad," she whispered one morning, placing a small American flag beside the stone. "I showed them who you were, through me." The shooting range was renamed the Michael Carter Memorial Range, and a bronze plaque at its entrance reads, "In honor of Staff Sergeant Michael Carter and his daughter Alyssa, whose quiet strength reminded us that excellence often lives where we least expect it." And so, the girl who had been laughed at for wanting to shoot became a global symbol. Not of rebellion, not of revenge, but of resilience. Alyssa didn't just break a record. She broke a system, and she did it not by shouting, but by showing. 6 months after that unforgettable morning at Fort Ridgewell, the entire base looked and felt different. Gone were the whispers of mockery that once filled the officers' club. In their place was something rarely spoken aloud in military circles, but deeply felt: shame. Not because they had been outperformed, but because they had refused to believe a child could be exceptional, simply because of her age, her gender, and the color of her skin. Colonel Robert McCain was no longer a feared presence on the base. After a formal investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. The consequences were swift and public. He was demoted, reassigned to a remote administrative post in Alaska, and denied the retirement honors he had long expected. His name, once spoken with fear, became a cautionary tale. The photograph of him sneering at Alyssa Carter just moments before she made history now hung in training halls, not as inspiration, but as a reminder. Never underestimate someone because of your prejudice. Major Thompson and Captain Walker, two of McCain's closest allies in ridicule, weren't spared either. Both received official reprimands in their service records and were subjected to mandatory anti-bias and ethical leadership courses. Their reputations were forever marred. They now served under commanders who had witnessed the event firsthand, officers who never forgot the stunned silence that followed Alyssa's final shot. But for Alyssa, the world had opened up in unimaginable ways. At just 13 years old, she wore the gold badge of junior precision marksmanship, instructor, the youngest in military history. Her days were now split between regular school, advanced ballistics training, and mentoring military children who, thanks to her, believed, for the first time, that they too could belong. The shooting range where her story began was renamed the Michael Carter Memorial Range in honor of her father. At the entrance, a polished bronze plaque told their story, not with flair but with truth. A daughter's promise, a father's legacy, a lesson in humility and greatness. Every Saturday morning, just as she had for 3 years, Alyssa still arrived at the range. But now, she didn't train alone. Around her stood young recruits, children of all backgrounds and ethnicities, listening with wide eyes as she taught them how to breathe, how to focus, how to stand tall, not just in posture, but in purpose. She always began with the same words: respect is earned through actions, not assumptions. Across the country, her story had become curriculum. In leadership seminars, her video was shown not just to celebrate excellence, but to dissect the danger of assumption. Universities offered her early admission. Aerospace companies sent her gear. Even Olympic coaches reached out trying to recruit her. But when asked about her plans, Alyssa only smiled and said, "I just want to keep proving what we're capable of." Her quid defiance had sparked a movement. Children from marginalized communities flooded social media with messages, photos, and videos, using hashtags like #ShootForRespect and #LegacyNotLimits. A girl in Mississippi started her own backyard training group called Carter's Cadets. A young boy from Detroit wrote in his school essay, "I want to be like Alyssa, not because she shoots well, but because she didn't let them tell her who she was." Her impact rippled far beyond the military. Lawmakers cited her story while drafting new edicts, legislation promoting diversity in military training and leadership. A foundation was launched, in her name, the Carter Initiative, dedicated to funding STEM, leadership, and discipline-based programs for underrepresented youth. And still, Alyssa remained grounded. She continued visiting her father's grave every week, no longer with tears, but with stories. "They listened this time, Dad," she would whisper. "And now, they're learning." During a nationally televised interview, a journalist asked her the question millions wanted to know. "Do you hate Colonel McCain for what he did?" Alyssa paused. The room held its breath. Then she answered with the grace of someone far beyond her years. "Number. He gave me the opportunity to prove him wrong. And because of that, millions of kids now believe in themselves. Sometimes, the people who try to break you are the ones who give you the greatest stage to rise." It wasn't just a comeback. It was a transformation. Alyssa Carter didn't seek revenge. She didn't lash out. She showed up. She faced the storm, not with anger, but with calm, unstoppable skill. She turned humiliation into history, and rejection into recognition. Her victory wasn't just in her aim, it was in her impact. In a world that often tells children, especially girls of color, to sit down and wait their turn, Alyssa's story delivered a different message. You don't have to wait to be respected. You just have to rise high enough that they can no longer look past you. And she did. At just 13 years old, Alyssa Carter stood at the front of the Fort Ridgewell auditorium, wearing a pressed uniform and a steady gaze that rivaled any seasoned soldier. The room, packed with generals, veterans, cadets, and hundreds of military families, fell into a day two respectful silence as the official words were spoken. By the authority of the United States Armed Forces Exceptional Talent Program, we hereby recognize Alyssa Carter as the youngest certified junior precision marksmanship instructor in U.S. military history. The gold badge pinned to her chest glinted under the light, small, yet impossibly heavy with meaning. For Alyssa, this moment was not the beginning of her journey, but a milestone along a road paved with grief, grit, and a promise made beneath a folded flag. A promise to her father. Staff Sergeant Michael Carter had been more than a decorated war hero. To Alyssa, he was a teacher, a protector, and the man who taught her how to calm her breath before every shot, and how to stand tall when the world tried to make her feel small. He had died in combat 3 years earlier. At first, the loss threatened to consume her. She was only 9. But instead of collapsing, under the weight of sorrow, Alyssa turned her pain into purpose. She began training quietly, tirelessly, every weekend at dawn, with her father's voice guiding her through each shot in her mind. Over time, she honed a skill so precise, so disciplined, that it would ultimately humble officers who had once mocked her very presence on a military base. Her story, of how she took 10 perfect shots at 50 meters, then again at 500 meters, spread across the world. But it was what came after that turned Alyssa from a viral sensation into a national figure of respect and reform. She didn't chase cameras or attention. She went back to the range, back to discipline, back to the basics her father had taught her. And when the Army formally recognized her with instructor credentials, it wasn't for show. It was because her knowledge, her precision, and her composure had surpassed expectations, usually reserved for elite adult marksmen. Now, every Saturday morning, Alyssa teaches. Children of service members line up quietly at the newly renamed Michael Carter Memorial shooting range, where a bronze statue stands just inside the entrance. A kneeling soldier, handing a pair of earmuffs to a small girl, her eyes focused forward. Underneath the statue, a plaque reads, "To those who honor legacy not with words, but with excellence." Alyssa begins every session with a ritual her father taught her. 3 deep breaths. Then she speaks. You are here because someone saw potential in you. But potential is not enough. Respect is not given in this world. It is earned through action, through precision, and through purpose. She teaches not just how to shoot, but how to stand, how to listen, how to focus, and most importantly, how to endure. Under her instruction, young cadets have begun outperforming senior trainees in focus and discipline. One major even confessed, "I've been in the Army 15 years and a teenager just taught me something I never learned at boot camp." But perhaps Alyssa's greatest achievement lies not in how she shoots, but in how she lifts others. The Carter Cadet Cohort, a new pilot program inspired by her journey, now offers free training, mentorship, and leadership development for children of fallen soldiers. Funded in part by donations from veterans moved by Alyssa's story, it has already trained over 200 blanks from students nationwide. Even more touching is the quiet ritual Alyssa continues each week after her sessions end. With the range empty and sun just beginning to climb, she walks alone to her father's grave. She kneels, places her hand on the cold stone, and whispers, "I taught them what you taught me, Dad." And they listened. The moment is private, but the impact is public. Military policies across bases have shifted, making space for youth, talent, mentorships, and requiring updated training for officers on unconscious bias. Alyssa's image, once a prize, laughingstock in the eyes of certain officers, now hangs in training halls with the caption, "Judge by discipline, not by assumptions." During a special Pentagon ceremony, the Secretary of Defense personally presented her with a certificate recognizing her as a national symbol of excellence and inclusion. She received standing ovations not just for her skills, but for her humility. In her speech, Alyssa said, "I didn't come to prove anyone wrong. I came to prove my father right. He believed I could do something great, even if others didn't. And now, I teach others to believe that, too." That speech went viral again. But this time, the headlines weren't just about a girl who beat the colonel. They were about a leader in the making. Someone redefining what power, precision, and potential look like. From a lonely girl holding a yellowed envelope to a national instructor shaping the next indexed generation. Alyssa Carter's journey isn't one of revenge. It's one of resolve. And at just 13 years old, she's already teaching the world one of its most valuable lessons. Respect doesn't wait for permission. It's earned with every step you take when no one believes you can. Even after the cameras faded and headlines quieted down, Alyssa Carter remained unchanged. Every week, she returned to the same quiet spot. Section 12, Grave 147, beneath an old oak tree at the edge of the military cemetery. There, she knelt before her father's resting place, brushing leaves off the stone and whispering updates only he could hear. "I taught 5 new kids today, Dad. One of them couldn't hit the target at first, but I told him, what you used to tell me, stillness lives between heartbeats." And on his 3rd try, he did it. There were no crowds, no applause, just a daughter honoring a legacy not with words, but with unwavering action. Despite being only 13, Alyssa had reshaped the future of an entire military program, sparked a national movement, and built a path for others to follow. But what mattered most to her wasn't the badges or the awards. It was keeping a promise to a man who had believed in her long before the world did. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not the ones seen on stage, but the quiet promises we keep long after no one is watching. Your pain, your loss, it can become purpose. Never underestimate what a broken heart, filled with love, can build. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or silenced, drop a comment below. Let the world know you're still standing. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and the people who refuse to be forgotten. Because the world needs to hear your fire too.